there lived a husband and wife. For a long time they already wanted to have a child, but he was not there.
Oh.
One day, my wife fell ill. The husband asked her what she wants the most. The wife replied that there was a magnificent garden nearby, where many of the most beautiful flowers grow. There is a beautiful Rapunzel in the garden. It looked so fresh and so green that she really wanted to taste it. But the garden was surrounded by a high fence, and no one dared to enter it, since this garden belonged to one witch. She possessed great power, and everyone in the world feared her. The husband loved his wife very much, and decided to get a Rapunzel for her, no matter what it cost him. And so at dusk he climbed over the stone fence into the sorceress's garden, in a hurry picked up a whole handful of green Rapunzel, and brought it to his wife. She immediately made herself a salad from it, and ate greedily. She liked this salad so much that the next day she wanted even more than before. The husband made his way into the garden again, but the witch was already standing in front of him. She glared at him angrily and said that he would pay a lot for stealing the Rapunzel. He asked the witch not to be angry, because he tore off the Rapunzel for his wife, who was very ill. And he loves her so much.
Okay.
The witch's anger passed a little, and she said that if it was true, she would allow him to collect as much Rapunzel as he wanted, but on one condition. He will have to give the witch the child who will be born to his wife. The husband agreed with fear. When the wife gave birth to a daughter, the witch immediately appeared, took the child with her, and named her Rapunzel. Rapunzel became the most beautiful girl in the world. When she was 12 years old, the witch locked her in a tower. That tower was in the forest, and it had no doors or stairs. Only at the very top was a small window. When the witch wanted to climb the tower, she called Rapunzel to pull her sides down. And Rapunzel had long, beautiful hair. She hears the voice of the witch, loosens her braids, ties them up to the window hook, and the hair falls down, and the witch then climbs up, clinging to them.
Hello.
Several years passed, and the king's son happened to ride a horse through the forest where the tower stood. Suddenly he heard singing, and it was so pleasant that he stopped and began to listen. Rapunzel sang it in her wonderful voice. The prince wanted to climb up. He began to look for the entrance to the tower, but it was impossible to find him. He once saw how the witch climbs up the braids that Rapunzel lowered her. And the next day, when it was already getting dark, the prince drove up to the tower and called Rapunzel. She heard, pulled her braids down, and the prince climbed up. Rapunzel, seeing that a man she had never seen came to her, was very frightened at first. But the prince spoke to her affectionately and said that his heart was so touched by the singing that he decided to see her without fail. Then Rapunzel ceased to be afraid, and when he asked if she agreed to marry him, she gave her consent and held out her hand to him. But they just did not know how to go down together. They figured out that when the prince came, he would always take a piece of silk with him, and Rapunzel would weave a ladder out of it. And when the ladder is ready, they will go down it together and leave. The sorceress did not notice anything until one day Rapunzel asked why it is easier to drag the prince up. The sorceress understood everything, got angry and clutched in rage at Rapunzel's beautiful hair. I wrapped them around my left arm several times, and with my right grabbed the scissors and cut them off. She took the sorceress into the dense thicket of Rapunzel and hid her there. She tied the severed braids to the window hook, and when the prince appeared, she pulled them down. The prince climbed up and saw the witch. She looked at him with her malicious look and said that he would never see Rapunzel. The king's son was beside himself with grief and jumped out of the tower in despair, but the thorny thorns of the bushes, on which he fell, gouged out his eyes. The blind prince wandered for several years in grief and sorrow through the forest, all the time grieving and crying for his beloved lost. Once he went into a dense thicket. Suddenly the prince heard someone singing. It seemed so familiar to him, and he went to meet him. When he came closer, Rapunzel recognized him, threw herself on his neck and cried bitterly with joy. 2 tears fell in his eyes, and the prince regained his sight and began to see as before. He brought her to his kingdom, and they lived for many, many years in happiness and joy.
A princess lived in a luxurious castle. She was only 14 years old, but she was terribly spoiled and moody. Once she came up with something for April to come, and there were spring flowers at the New Year's banquet. She issued a decree in which she announced the beginning of spring and promised to generously reward the one who brings snowdrops to the palace. In a small house on the outskirts of the city lived a stepmother with her daughter and stepdaughter. The stepdaughter was a very sweet and kind girl, and her name was Masha. The stepmother and daughter were very lazy and angry, and they hurt the poor girl in every possible way. They really wanted to receive the reward promised by the princess, but they could not think of where to get the snowdrops in winter. The old woman decided to send Masha to the forest to bring them spring flowers. The stepdaughter began to beg her stepmother to take pity on her, because it was dark and cold outside. And what kind of snowdrops can there be in winter? But the greedy old woman did not want to hear anything. She gave a larger basket and drove Masha out the door. The frozen girl was very scared in a dark forest. Suddenly, in the distance, she saw a light. She was delighted and went to meet him. It turned out that it was a large blazing fire, and 12 people were warming themselves around it. Plucking up her courage, the girl approached them and told them that the evil stepmother made her go into the forest and collect snowdrops. It turned out that it was 12 months. The brothers felt sorry for Masha, and they decided to help her. Brother April chanted a spell, and suddenly spring came in the forest and in the clearing. The snow melted, green grass appeared, snowdrops blossomed. The girl began to collect flowers and soon filled a large basket with them. Young April liked her very much, and he gave her a magic ring. If trouble happens, he must be thrown to the ground, a spell cast, and all 12 months will come to the rescue. Masha thanked them and went home. When the girl brought the snowdrops home, the stepmother and daughter were very surprised at this. Masha was very tired from the journey and immediately fell asleep soundly. Her half-sister suspected something was wrong. While the girl was sleeping, she found her magic ring and took it to herself. After waking up, the stepdaughter discovered the loss. She began to beg to return the ring, but her stepmother and daughter did not want to hear anything. Taking a basket of snowdrops, they hurried to the royal palace. In the palace there was a magnificently decorated New Year tree. But the upcoming celebration did not please the capricious princess at all. And only when the stepmother and daughter brought her a whole basket of snowdrops, the princess changed her anger to mercy. The stepmother could not clearly answer where the flowers came from, and she had to admit that her stepdaughter had collected them. The princess immediately decided to go to the meadow with snowdrops. On the way, she looked to poor Masha, so that she would show her the place where she picked flowers. The girl said she would show it, but only if the ring was returned to her. From such insolence, the princess was angry and threw away the ring. But the stepdaughter managed to cast a spell. Immediately a strong wind rose, thunder rumbled, foliage fell, and snow began to fall. Old Man January appeared before them. He invited everyone to make one wish. Out of fear, the princess wished to be in the palace as soon as possible. Masha made a wish that everything would return to its place in due time, winter in winter, summer in summer. The stepmother and her daughter were so frozen that they wanted fur coats from any fur, even from a dog. Saying this, the greedy women immediately turned into dogs. They were harnessed to a sleigh on which the princess was to get to the palace. Masha thanked the brothers for their help. They promised to turn the stepmother and her daughter back into humans, but only when they become obedient. Months gave the girl a wonderful big sled, harnessed by frisky horses. Seeing them, the princess asked for a ride to the palace. It was the first time in her life that the princess had uttered the word please. And Masha gladly agreed.